is not just a little bit faster than numerical weather prediction or NWP. It's tens of thousands of times faster. It's a lot faster. Understanding the critical processes, the physics behind a forecast is really important for building trust. If you want to use what you know, what you learned on your degree to help shape the world, now is the moment we need people. It's even more important that we take this moment to reset, that we start to think seriously about what are we going to do to ensure that our workforce is inclusive and is diverse, and that we're getting the best, richest possible approach, the most innovative approach.
So this week on GAEA Talks, Kirstine Dale. Lovely to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
So I personally love what you do. I think everyone finds it as a really daily conversation. It's something so deeply ingrained in all of our lives, but the science behind it is fascinating. So do you want to give us a little insight into who you are, what you do, and how you got there?
So I'm Kirstine Dale. I'm the Met Office's Chief AI Officer, and I have responsibility for embedding AI across all of our functions. So that includes basic corporate service functions. So how might you use a co-pilot in everyday functions in HR or finance, but also the bedrock science of the Met Office. How might we use AI for weather forecasting or modelling how the climate might change? And then the last mile to the customer. So thinking about how do we use AI for products and services. So getting the information to the people who need to make decisions about how to live their lives or manage infrastructure, for example. Should we open a runway at Heathrow? How do we get them the information that they need?
Because even recently, this particular winter has led to a very, very wet series of conditions, and we can think about it as well. We'll think about the weather, we'll talk about it, but the real implication, it's almost like we see it from our own two eyes, but everything that we touch has had an impact. The global supply chain, what we wear in the morning. I mean, obviously, if it's freezing cold, you're going to wear something different than in the summer. Well, you could connect that to fashion. You could think about food. You could think about crops growing. Everything is touched by it.
Yeah, absolutely. Weather touches everybody's lives every day. And I think the really exciting opportunities of AI are that we can really start personalizing what weather information means for individuals. So moving beyond what the weather will be to what the weather will do, what it's going to mean, and how that might affect some of the decisions that you need to make on a daily basis. It's a great time to be working in AI.
So tell me the story about how the science of meteorology, of climate, of weather, and because they're all variants of a similar thing, the story of AI and the evolution of AI within that science, because you mentioned in our little pre-chat, it was a really fortunate position, and it's probably one of the most advanced uses of artificial intelligence. And to be clear, we're not talking large language models. We're talking about the real deep breadth of AI.
That's a really interesting question. And I think that it kind of falls into two camps of the pull factors and the push factors. So I think the pull here was um, there is a growing awareness that the climate is changing and of our sensitivity to the weather. So, for example, if you think that the last 5 hottest years on record in the UK have been since 2014. In 2022, for the first time ever, it went above 40 degrees. And we now have looked at the science of this, and we know that a hot summer where it goes over 40 degrees is now 20 times more likely than it was in the 1960s. So our climate is changing, and it's not just temperature that's going up. Our due to this relationship called the Clausius-Clapeyron relation, where a 1 degree increase in temperature results in a 7% increase in the amount of moisture held in the atmosphere. Extreme or downpour events are more intense and more frequent, and we are more vulnerable to these extremes in the weather. So it's changing, and we need to get ready for these changes. So there was a real pull factor. People are more aware of their sensitivity and that there is this change coming our way. So where do you look for information on the weather? Well, hopefully you look to the Met Office as the UK's National Met Service. And we're good. We're consistently in the top 2 weather forecasting centres in the world. And as I keep telling my neighbours, 92.5% of our temperature forecasts are accurate within 2 degrees, which is really good. So there is good information available from the Met Office. But we don't sit on our laurels and say, oh, well, good enough is good enough. We're constantly trying to find ways of getting better and looking for technological or scientific breakthroughs that can help us get better. So we were delighted when the AI revolution started to affect the weather industry. We are always looking for ways to improve the forecast, and this has resulted in what is called the quiet revolution, which is a steady increase in improvement in how we forecast the weather. And this steady increase is generally seen by increases in compute availability. More data can go in, so like when satellites come online, we have more observational data that we can put in, which is ground truthing data for the weather forecast, and increasing sophistication of the model, so better understanding of the physics, and we can build that into the model. And then on the push side of it, our industry became and is a very nutty problem for AI, and it's very attractive. And it's attractive for a couple of reasons, but including that there is an enormous amount of data. So I often say big data is our everyday. We have 15 billion observations coming through the organisation every day. We produce 18 terabytes of data using our parallel and operational suites. So we are used to handling big amounts of data. Now that, coupled with the advances in high performance computing and data science techniques, and like increasingly sophisticated models that can be used, meant that we were a very tractable problem and very attractive for people wanting to see what could AI really be used for. So because of that, the sector attracted the attention of some of the big tech organisations. And I'm going to single out Google, but there are all of the big tech organisations are active in this space. So Google were one of the front runners, and they developed the GraphCast model, for which they received the MacRoberts Award for innovation in engineering in 2024. So that's great. And not only did they develop that model, but it was published open source. So it really gave us a bit of a lift, a bit of an insight as to what was possible. So we had the pull factors being, we're sensitive to the weather, the climate is changing, we need more information. And we had this push of these big tech organisations have shown what is possible. So it was alignment of the planets. AI arrived at just the right time for us.
It's a huge driver of something which is so important to. I mean, you can look at every point of life, every type of sector, every industry. It's a fundamental decision-making key factor. And the fact that the amount of data it's always kind of being recorded,
Yeah.
but looking at how technology has evolved. And I said to you earlier, we had Alberto, who was Unilever, and then Philips and Nokia before that. So he saw the whole journey of phones, and then phones with app ecosystems, Internet of Things, sensors beginning to be everywhere. All of these different fundamental technologies have all converged to make the amount of data that can come in, that can be trusted, to really pour in, and to, given the data around what happens today, we said from a military operation, what happens if it's foggy? You can't go on your helicopter. What happens if the roads are messed up because of heavy downpours and hail? Well, that could affect shipping or transportation. I know that happened, I think, with the pasty company, where the majority of their manufacture of pasties sold in petrol stations across the country was down in Cornwall, and one road was taken out, I think related to severe weather, which caused crashes, and then that shut off, and then nobody gets their pasties in the morning. I mean, it's kind of simple, but you look at the real vast scale of it, and then thinking satellites obviously being deployed, you're looking at the space capabilities. It's a huge amalgamation of technologies we would never even have thought of 100 years ago, and everything working to just put more and more, and where it's going could be even bigger. And I suppose there's the risk in the public domain of understanding, which I think is really important. You're having this conversation. If we look at LLMs and hallucinations and the public view of AI being that, but then we look at the scientific and the more tech-savvy individuals who understand trusted AI or trusted technology, the foundations of scaling up, the different types of databases that can be used, data transformation, the issues that come with that, multimodal data flowing through of different sources, quantifying it, and not just assuming that'll be fine. Don't worry about that. Knowing things could potentially be quite untrue, I think is important for people to form a different view of what AI is in many ways.
Yes, I completely agree. I think that it's really important to make a distinction between some of the deep learning techniques that we're using for weather prediction and use of a large language model. That they're quite different. So, for example, the Met Office are working with the Alan Turing Institute to co-develop the weather machine learning weather prediction model FastNet, and this is a model that's built on a graph neural net, so it's got some similarities with GraphCast and other models actually. And this this is very different to using a large language model. This is
Transformer based,
no,
as in large language models are more transformer
oh
based.
yes,
And if people who decision makers, because our audience is AI researchers, decision makers in enterprises and VCs for some reason. So if people can distinguish the difference of LLMs, transformer-based technology, the fundamentals, and everything else is probably 90+% in reality, but it's the unspoken.
yes. It's quite funny, Graham. When people talk to me about AI, they use it synonymously with large language models. So like the vast majority of people who talk to me outside of work assume that when I'm talking about AI, I'm talking about ChatGPT, which um, that kind of underestimates the enormous amount of research that's going on for using deep learning to solve some of the major scientific challenges that we have today, like protein folding or forecasting the weather.
Yeah. So there are numerous new ideas of AI, and when we talk about AI, let's be quite succinct about it. So I'm thinking, I know Jan LeCun has been looking at world models, so physics based. We've with generative video AI, we've got things that we've been up to. So I've learned a huge amount about the many different interpretations of a world model, but we're talking physics-based models. In the meteorological world, what's the difference between the traditional methods, physics-based, non-physics-based, predictive? How first off, how would you put that into little bite-sized pieces and say, this is what we've had, this is what's coming, this is the upside, the downside, and where's it going to go?
At the Met Office, we use numerical weather prediction. This is a physics-based approach for forecasting the weather, and this is based on Newtonian physics, so conservation of mass, momentum, and energy. And we take observations, we use an algorithm, so based on these Newtonian laws, to forecast what the weather will be in the future. And this is very robust. I've been using it a long time since I think Lewis Fry Richardson came up with this in 1952, so a long time, so it's got a long provenance, and it's trusted because it works. Like I say, Met Office produces accurate forecasts, top 2 weather forecasting centres in the world. AI is quite different. The AI model that we're developing with Turing Institute, a fast stack model, takes inputs, outputs. It's a graph neural net, or this is based on a graph neural net model. I think the biggest difference is speed and accuracy, and it's not just a little bit faster than numerical weather prediction or NWP. It's tens of thousands of times faster. It's a lot faster, and it being faster means lots of good things. It means it's computationally light, so we're not generating a lot of energy or using water for cooling. It also means that you can run the forecast nearer the time that you actually need it, which means you've got more opportunity for ground truthing data, putting more observations in it. And it means that there is a potential for you to be able to run it using edge computing. So if it's computationally light, then in theory in the future you might not need a supercomputer. We might just be able to run weather forecast on our mobile phones for the location that we're in. So there are lots of advantages. Now there are some I'd say at the at the moment there are some challenges for some of the machine learning models. When I think back to the early ones, which really we're only talking about 2022, so it's not that long ago really, but I suppose data science used to be like dog years, so it's that's about 20, 30 years ago, I suppose. If you think back to those early models, some of them didn't contain all of the physical parameters that you need. So like one of the early models I remember didn't contain precipitation or rain. Clearly that's not going to be good for the UK. We need to know what's happening with precipitation. Some of the models don't contain all the temporal and spatial resolution that you need for a weather forecast. And there are some other drawbacks. Sometimes they smooth the data a bit, so it's difficult to pick out the weather fronts. So there are some drawbacks, but every time I talk about these drawbacks, the technology and the science advances, and I'm confident that we will get over these hurdles in the future, and then we'll be able to really tap into the power of using these machine learning models alongside physics-based. People often ask me whether there is a future for physics-based models, and absolutely, I think there's a future for physics-based models. I think that our future lies in a blended approach of using physics-based approaches alongside machine learning-based approaches. And I think some of the reasons that we're going to need physics-based approaches is because understanding the critical processes, the physics behind a forecast, is really important for building trust. And whereas there's like a scale of decisions. whether or not hang washing out is at one end of the spectrum, but we also use weather information to decide whether or not it's safe to open a runway at Heathrow. And I think understanding the physics helps you build trust and really be able to have confidence in the forecast.
It goes to the question of what you're trying to achieve in many ways. And I've looked at, we talked about just briefly the former Coca-Cola guy example and the ice cubes. And part of the view, there were some peculiar nuances. And the things that I looked at was the Enzo cycle and seeing where that was, and really paid attention to seeing, even though we were interested in one area, which was Europe, the world is one ecosystem. So we would look at El Nino and La Nina, and we assessed a number of years. We looked at decadal models, and the decadal models were really, really accurate, but they were accurate in a generic context. But they seemed to be really interesting, but you weren't using them in a short-term sort of basis. But when you looked at all the different things that were happening, it began to become clear because you'd have to make a decision on what to buy a year ahead of time. So you need to know pretty much what's going to happen this summer and what's going to happen next summer now. And a lot of decisions, a lot of manufacturing would happen, supply chain set up, not set up. And you'd have to, the instances which would move the needle would be specific, but there would be lots of specific happening within a generic area of time. So it's going to be hot. And this is where the thing that you mentioned earlier about 1 degree in temperature increasing the amount of humidity or the amount of moisture in the air. Well, the idea was, if it's going to be very warm in the winter compared to traditional levels, that probably just means it's going to sustain a lot more moisture in the ground to then come up. So for areas which are particularly arid and potentially previously desertified, and some areas are getting desertified in some of the areas we were looking at, then it really does have a huge impact, because it can move the whole optimal buying cycle by 2 months, or it can create a long tail to the sales cycle at the end of the year. There was a peculiar other thing. This was the El Nino and the La Nina areas where it seemed to be really, really rainy almost consistently in Asia when we'd have a heat dome in Europe. And when things were the other way, and people typically from the press would think La Nina is the hot time, it wasn't so much the hot time for us, it would be somewhere else. Then seeing what happens in the US with the shift of I forget the polar thing that goes around. What is
jet stream?
That's a simple word. I can never remember a simple word. But yeah, the jet stream, when it came too low, for us, if it's too low, it changes the conditions here quite dramatically. But we noticed that as that kind of rose up, yes, you had big freezes in the US and north of the US, but places like Northern Europe or Northern France, Germany, Poland, their sales were going absolutely insane, but that was a tipping point. They'd never had that before. If you said, is Spain going to be hot in the summer? Yes. Was it hot before? Yes. So it's not a change, but there are parts of Northern Europe that it's changed behaviors to such a dramatic extent. They're almost like emerging markets for certain products that there literally wasn't a market there before. And they're so unprepared because it was not something they were used to having. So we're talking over the last 5 years, but that last 5 years, as you said, since 2014, has been such a dramatic shift, other than 1 or 2 years where it dipped down. But if from a business perspective, people were saying, we're going to plan next year based on last year, but the number of hot days in the cities you're interested in was 2, now it's going to be 36. if you use the private equity methodology, you're in trouble the second you've done the calculations, because it didn't take into consideration the big shifts on the global stage of the environment to understand what your part of the pie here is really going to be impacted like.
I think this is a really good point, and it goes to why there is a future for physics-based modelling. Not only is it important you understand those processes, but it's what you should expect in the future. So, for example, machine learning weather prediction models use training data that is created from numerical weather prediction, and their predictions for the future are limited by the training data. So if it's been trained on data that is not experienced, that like a 40-degree day didn't happen in that, then it won't forecast a 40-degree in the future because it's out of sample, so it's limited by the training data. Now that has quite serious implications when you think about how the climate is changing. So if you're training your machine learning model on the weather before the change of climate, the climate change, then it's going to predict different things than it would do if you used predict what the climate's going to be like in the future. So we need to constantly update the training data, and that requires the physics-based approach. In addition, I think one of the current limitations, I should say, because things are moving so fast, hopefully this will be tackled in the future, is machine learning models don't predict gray swan events. So things that are physically possible but statistically rare. Now, those are often the things that are going to have the biggest impact on humans and society. These are things we need to watch out for. The things like the flooding at Boscastle, for example, the floods in Valencia, the floods that are on the train up today. I noticed the Somerset levels are still all flooded. So these are events that these are extreme events, are things that we need to plan for. And if machine learning models have been trained on data that doesn't contain those sorts of conditions, this is going to be a limitation. But they're looking at that, so the data scientists are trying to find a solution to this, so I'm hopeful.
Because the more graph-based way of looking at things is also fascinating when you consider the impact, and we'll get on to the relationship between the public sector and then in business, but urbanization, this was a big thing. So people may make a decision, will there be flooding? Well, there was never flooding. But if you see mass urbanization, where it's no longer porous ground, you've now got massive areas of concrete and tarmac, etc., and there hasn't been a severe precipitation event on a sustained basis for a long period of time. And we saw this in the US with hurricanes. The danger was obviously high winds for a small period of time, but that was probably for a very thin trajectory. In reality, it's a very wide area with dumping a month's worth of rain in 24, 48 hours as the hurricane kind of moves around and takes over. So then if you've never had a severe incident like that in a particular area for 15 years, but you've reurbanized the entire area, you've changed the description of everything, then it's like rock, paper, scissors, and you're changing one of the elements in the calculation. So you could then get mass flooding. You could have little areas where it's really dangerous and potentially catastrophic. And from the weather perspective, it's the same information, but the context in which we live changes. And describing the world in which we live, and then being able to create neural networks of how that connects in with the observation, observed and predicted, and constantly kind of cross-correlating. It means if there were a situation in the UK we could have observed in the US or in Spain the same circumstances and not had to worry about, do we understand everything? It's the circumstances could then be applicable across the UK. And when those instances climatologically happen, then it can make us aware of outcomes which we wouldn't have possibly considered before.
I think you're right. And I think that AI presents a really good opportunity for us to move from what the weather will be to what it will do, to what will the impact be on the ground. And urbanization presents a very interesting set of challenges, not only in terms of flood risk, but also things like the urban heat island effect. So,
Explain that.
it's the way heat gets trapped in a city. Kind of the building's radiated out, and it exaggerates the temperature you're experiencing in that area anyway.
If in simple terms, if we think of like a road and tarmac or certain types of building materials, and I was actually watching a documentary on the pyramids last night, and the fact that they were white sandstone, I probably got that completely wrong, but it was really, really nice white, shiny stone. And I've actually been there as well, and knowing how hot it can get, just thinking, even from an artist perspective, it's one of the first things you learn, the color wheel and how to have the relationship with the colors and what properties they have. Obviously, black paint or things which are darker, they absorb the heat. And going back to the Egyptian idea, it's why a lot of the people over there will drive white vans and white pickup trucks and white everything rather than black ones, because otherwise your coals just get so horrifically hot in the summer that it's unbearable. So light colors reflect and dark colors absorb. Is that the sort of basis for?
Yes, that's roughly the urban heat island effect. It's about how the different surfaces in a city absorb and radiate heat, but also how the air moves around a city as well. But it can result in the temperature in the city being a bit higher than it would be if it were, say, if you were out in the countryside, for example, where there's less built-up environment to radiate the heat.
So tell me about the early movers in this space, in this sector.
So the early movers into this space were big tech organizations because it was a really tractable problem. There's lots of data. They had access to GPUs and infrastructure and these really increasingly sophisticated data science skills. So big tech were an early first mover, and that was great because they are set up to, they are more likely to be able to back a long bet than a public sector organisation like the Met Office, where we're responsible for providing operational forecasts for decision makers and the public. So we're less set up for backing the low probability but high impact science. The big tech organizations did a great job for us there. They showed what was possible, and in many ways, they lit the touch paper. They attracted the attention of other national Met services like the Met Office, but also an early forerunner was the European Centre for Medium Range Forecasting, ECMWF. They developed a model very early on. And the weather sector took attention, paid attention. We now know that this technology has serious potential to result in a real paradigm shift in how we forecast the weather in the future and how we draw on the best of physics-based approaches alongside machine learning approaches. So the two will run hand in hand, and this is a very active area for research at the moment. We're looking at how do we come up with the optimal blend of physics-based approach and machine learning approaches. What might that look like in the future? So it's a very exciting time.
And that methodology or that attention to exploration of how to use technology to understand the climate and the world we live in and all the subcategories they're under. One person that I followed and researched a lot was Jim Simons. I don't know if you're familiar with Jim. He's passed away now, but he created Renaissance Technologies and the Medallion Fund, which is the best performing fund concurrently. I don't know, something like 60% return per year, every year for however many decades he ran it. And his rules, from the book I've read of his, no people from the banking industry. It was only scientists. And he started it something like 48 years old after being fired for expressing his opinion. He was working in some form of geotemporal related intelligence as a scientist, and thought, well, if everything in the world is affected by what happens within it, the primary influencing factor on everything, and subsequently the market and every industry, why not learn to figure that out? And I don't think it was ever disclosed how he did it or what he did. And after raising some money, he capped it at, I think, a $10 billion fund, and it was never allowed to be more because it would influence things the wrong way. And it was just a fund that ran for years for the staff. That was it. And it was so it was more like, apparently, a scientific university, their campus, rather than anything to do with the financial industry. It became a big advocate for helping physics, science, a big donator for that, and he was a scientist. So for people that think this particular topic is something that sits over in one place or the other, people should really realize how critical it is to everything around us.
Yeah, and I feel very fortunate to be working at the Met Office because there's such a high density of scientists and technologists, and the one word that I think unifies most people in the Met Office is curious. So they are really keen to embrace new technologies, and having had big tech organizations show that this was possible, there was real enthusiasm in the Met Office to, right, well, we can see that this has potential. Let's have a go. Let's see if we can make this work. So it's been a very exciting time.
Well, I think importantly as well, and getting on to another topic, that was driven forward by yourself. So what's your experience as a woman being a leader in, let's be honest, what has been perceived a very male-centric world? I mean, I look at it as a human world, and innovation ideas is human innovation ideas, and we shouldn't be looking to make assumptions and discriminate. So tell us your experience of that.
Um, this is such an exciting time to be a scientist. Um, I feel like we are helping shape and create the future. And we need to encourage the next generation of data scientists to come in and help, because data science, AI, machine learning have the potential to solve some of the big societal challenges facing us today, like climate change. If you want to use what you know, what you learned on your degree to help shape the world, now is the moment. We need people to come of all, when I say people, I mean as diverse a range as possible in all dimensions. Gender is quite often used as a proxy for inclusion and diversity, but I firmly believe a rising tide lifts all boats. And if we can just make the science more inclusive, we can make the field more inclusive, then we will all benefit. I was a bit disappointed last year. The Lovelace report was published that showed that only 20% of the scientists working in AI, machine learning, data science are women, and that was exactly, eerily, the same figure that the Alan Turing Institute had reported in their study 4 years earlier. in Where Are the Women report, which looked at data science. So in those 4 years, which I think I look back on those 4 years, so 2022 onwards, as really exciting time in our field. Did they really not attract more women into working in data science? And because that's not just in weather, that's in all areas of the application of AI. So that was a difficult report to read, and I think it's really important that we try and understand what's driving this. There's a lot of literature on this, but some of the factors that are commonly cited are that at schools there's still a tendency, and I think it's at schools, but it's teachers and parents as well. They still think of subjects as pink and blue, and I think this does a great disservice to the next generation. People should be encouraged to study the thing that they get really excited about. And I like to think that might be physics and maths and science, but whatever spits the spark of imagination going, that's what people should be studying. We shouldn't be categorizing into pink and blue. There's also several books highlight a concern that data science is a little bit geeky and it doesn't really have much societal value. Or, Graeme, this cuts me to the core. I think that data science has the potential to solve these enormous challenges facing society, like security of energy, security of food, security of water, climate change, migration issues. The data science holds the keys to lots of these problems, but we need a nice, rich, diverse workforce addressing it. Diversity is good for many reasons. I mean, number one, it's ethical. But it is also shown that diverse workforces are more innovative, and my goodness, we need innovation at the moment. We need the spark, we need the magic of innovation right now if we're going to try and solve some of these problems. But diverse workforces are also more stable, more financially productive, better productivity and performance for companies with a diverse workforce. There is a wealth of evidence and reasons why we need diverse workforces, but for some reason we're not quite achieving it in data science at the moment.
It should really be in any world, but especially data science. You're dealing with the empirical and the ingrained views or thinking, almost institutionalized viewpoints that can come in from any range of reasons. And I'm not necessarily saying that anything particularly is good or bad. If we just look at it as information, depending where you're from, and you could say from Newcastle or from London, or you could say from Eritrea or South Africa, or from Hong Kong or somewhere else, part of recognizing the global world that we live in, which climatology and meteorology is an observation, scientific observation of that world that we live in, where something happens over here, it does or has the potential, is part of the same ecosystem to summarize the other side of the world. How we're bringing together to think, and the same would go for music, you get better, richer views when we can all see something from a different angle. If we all think exactly the same and we hold the same views, potentially prejudices, we can miss things if you live in an echo chamber. And if we look at where that has played out, well, now modern social media has been, it's not so much about what your view is, but so long as you become part of communities that only share your view, which reverb and give you a false sense of reality. And Tim Gordon, who we've had on, says even in the media, and it's all different walks of life. I'm not going to get into politics or political at all, but everyone thinks that people seem to have these very similar to themselves, but when you ask everyone individually, they're not the same, so to speak, but they can't recognize that. So to have that diversity, to have a a male look and a female look, the different perspectives of life experience of sexuality or race, culture, you do enrich things because it's different perspectives.
Oh, completely agree. And I think that the implications are even greater when you think about data science, because not only does diversity create a richer environment to work in, but within data science, you're quite often creating models or approaches that will be used to make decisions for society more broadly. So, any biases that you do have, any groupthink that you do have will have knock-on consequences and will ripple out across society. So I think this it's even more important that we take this moment to reset, that we start to think seriously about what are we going to do to ensure that our workforce is inclusive and is diverse, and that we're getting the best, richest possible approach, the most innovative approach, because we are drawing on these different ways of thinking and viewing the world.
Because that does actually look at the efficacy of potential AI output is something I've had lots of discussions with people about recently, where if you don't know what the training data is, or if you don't have a certain perspective, you wouldn't notice the training data doesn't actually have any representation for lots of other parts of the world or different representations. And most of the data used in training, a lot of the big public cloud-based models tend to be on white people because it's Western data. Equally, the Chinese models tend to be with Chinese people and Chinese data. It's no big surprise. But there's a massive underrepresentation of many other cultures, and it's only when you're around people who go, this is very, very different
Yeah.
from, I wouldn't have seen it that way. Even what does a police car look like or a post box look like? And I've had this working on films before, and the sound guys put a siren on the sound effects, and I'm thinking, that's not a British siren. It's really obvious to me. He was Canadian, and he put what he thought a siren on a police car sounds like. Turns out they're nothing the same. And it becomes jarring and noticeable, but it's only the different perspectives. Now, when we start to talk about data, if we can't recognize that, we're going to be creating problems we're not even aware we're creating.
Yeah, there is a really great book about this. I think it's called Invisible Wound by Caroline Creda Perez, and she highlights the significant issues of designing approaches and also approaches to providing safeguarding or healthcare. If you have a very narrow perspective of the people designing it. So, for example, one of the things she highlights is that seat belts had been historically designed around the male physiology, um, making them inappropriate and not optimized for safeguarding women who are in crashes. And she's got some statistics that she quotes that show that 4 women are dying because of seatbelts not being designed for their physiology. She also talks about how in healthcare previously the symptoms for a heart attack had been identified using the male physiology and how a heart attack would manifest in men. And that means that you miss some of the cases when women are having heart attacks. So the limitations of having a data set that is not diverse and developing algorithms that are not tapping into a diverse.
Well, they're biased.
Exactly.
I mean, we can call things what they are. They're biased where we can't probably see they're biased because we haven't seen all the perspectives.
Yes.
So it's rational, it's logical, and it's scientific.
So it's really important that we try and encourage a diverse workforce, a diverse and inclusive workforce to come and and tackle
And
some of these challenges.
how are you leading the way with some of these things? Because I know you've been working hard on it and you're literally doing it. So
Well, there's lots of things underway at the Met Office. We engage very broadly, locally and nationally, with a really inclusive workplace, work experience schemes. We're also, I take really seriously you have to see it to be it. So even though podcasts might not be the most comfortable thing in the world for me, I say yes, because you never know when somebody might be watching thinking, oh, is a career in AI or data science possible for someone like me? Well, yeah, yes, it is. It is possible for all of us. We can all. We shouldn't be ruling ourselves out of this. It's
at AI now, and again, I'm going to use the term AI in its general term. And we know it. We should get people to be looking at, well, what does that mean? What are all the options? But it is now more than ever an accelerant and an enabler for anyone. And I think it's the mindset. If you have the mindset to be resilient and to be willing to explore, to be willing to learn, the barriers that were detrimental to many groups of society, in many ways, that foundational element, this overcomes. And as I said to you, we've got fantastic people working with us and watching their confidence come through, male, female, of many different backgrounds. And it's being unlocked to create, to collaborate, and to move forward at such an incredible rate. And even this month compared to last month, the month before, it seems that we're on an exponential curve and we're on that hockey stick phase where it's literally going crazy. The world in 5 years' time will be unrecognizable from an opportunity perspective as it is now.
I completely agree. I also subscribe to the Amara law. So I think that we are overestimating how this technology is going to change our way of living and our work in the short term, but we have underestimated the changes in the long term. And that's very interesting. So, for example, at the Met Office, when we first started developing the fast note model and exploring what this might mean and how this might run alongside numerical weather prediction, I was getting questions about, oh, are you going to have avatars forecasting the weather? Are we're going to develop like a little army of avatars who will take the place of forecasters? And I think that's a good example of a Morris principle. No, I don't think that's going to happen. But do I think that this is going to be a paradigm shift in how we forecast the weather and the next generation of weather models? Yes, I do. But that's a longer term consequence. And that's what we're trying to work out at the moment. What's the optimal blend? But that's a Morris principle.
I agree with that. So, where would you see things in, I would say, 1 to 3 years?
So 1 to 3, actually 7 to 21 years using the stock years. So that was quite a long time. Um, I think that we will see an increasingly optimal blend of machine learning and physics-based approaches. I think that there's an opportunity for us to make forecasts more personal. And what do I mean by that? I mean translating the forecast into the language of the decision that you need to make. So, for example, I really love sailing. I'd like to think that in the future I will be able to ask my chatbot or my weather app, what's the best day to go sailing this week? And it will say, well, book Wednesday off because they're great conditions for sailing. So I think it will enable us to personalize the information. And I think we'll see information become more localized as well. So we've already done some really exciting work at the Met Office, looking at hyperlocal forecasts. And these are possible because of AI approaches. Downscaling, so that increasing spatial resolution is very computationally expensive. You use physics-based approaches, but AI approaches are much lighter. And I think there's a real opportunity here for us to think about downscaling weather information, but also climate information. So if you can get climate information on a hyper local scale, then that really helps inform adaptation and mitigation decisions.
I think that's going to be the ingredients for an exciting future, and the fact is it's evidence led, and that's got to be such an important thing to grasp across all walks of life. But they're hyper personalized. Everything is moving that way anyway, in how society is structured, how work is structured. So I think it probably have a massively increased value to understand oneself, one's surroundings, the activities, what we do, where we work, who we interact with, and with the changes climate change is making. It would be good for people to consider 1+1+1 doesn't necessarily mean progressively additive, but it means a rapid exponential curve of extremity of change. And that variable is the thing that we really need to be on top of, and people need to be aware of it. It goes back to the MR rule you mentioned. That's probably applicable to so many parts of life, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really good to hear you mention being evidence-led, because this is really central to weather forecasting. It's really important that we maintain public trust, because the forecasts that we put out are used to make really important safety decisions, as well as, should I put the washing out, but really big decisions. And that's why we need to maintain our physical understanding of the weather. But it also means that we need to walk forward with the public hand in hand and the users of our forecast, so that we understand what is possible, but also what is needed and what sorts of decisions are being made.
Excellent. Kirstine, that has been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you very much.